The Padilla family brought theirs back on a Tuesday. That was the first one I saw in person. Mrs. Padilla came in through the front door of Hargrove and Sons Cremation Services, carrying a brushed copper urn in both hands, holding it the way you'd hold a pot of water that was too full. Careful, deliberate, afraid of spilling. Her daughter was behind her. Neither of them had called ahead. Neither of them spoke to me when they came through the door. They just walked past the reception desk, past the consultation room where I'd sat with them 6 weeks earlier, and helped them choose the copper finish because Mr. Padilla had been a pipe fitter for 31 years, and Mrs. Padilla said copper was the only metal he ever respected, and they set the urn on the counter in front of Janine. Janine runs the front office. She'd been here 11 years. She looked at the urn, then at Mrs. Padilla, and said, "I understand. Let me get Glenn." No surprise, no confusion, just a procedure. Glenn Hargrove is the owner, 3rd generation. His name is on the sign outside. He came out of the back hallway, wiping his hands on a cloth, and when he saw the urn on the counter, he did this thing I would see him do many more times in the months that followed. He nodded once, slowly, and touched the side of the urn with 2 fingers, like he was checking a pulse. Then he said, "Come on back, Linda, bring Sophia." And he walked them down the hall to his office and closed the door. I looked at Janine. She was already pulling up something on her computer. I asked her what that was about. She didn't look up. She said, "Family decided they want to start over with a different vessel. It happens." It didn't feel like it happened. It felt like something that had happened before. I want to be clear about what I am and what I'm not. I'm not an embalmer. I'm not a crematory operator. I don't work with the dead. I work with the living. Glenn hired me because I had 6 years of hospice social work behind me and a face that grieving people trust, which is a real thing, whether or not it sounds like one. My job title was Family Services Coordinator, which meant I was the person who sat with you in the consultation room during the worst week of your life and helped you make 50 decisions you weren't ready to make. Urn material, memorial cardstock, whether to witness the cremation or not, whether to split the remains among family members, and if so, into how many portions, and did you want the keepsake pendants, and were you aware that we offered a remembrance garden on the grounds for families who wanted to scatter a portion locally? I was good at it. I was good at it because I genuinely cared, and because I had learned in hospice that the most important thing you can offer a grieving person is not comfort, but structure. Grief dissolves decision-making. You become a person who cannot choose what to eat for lunch, and then someone asks you to choose a casket or an urn, and you just stare at them. What I did was narrow the field. I listened to the family talk about the person they'd lost, and I gently steered them toward 3 or 4 options that felt right, and I let them choose among those. And they were grateful because what I'd really given them was a framework to feel like they were still honoring someone, when every cell in their body was screaming that nothing they did mattered anymore. I was 3 months into the job when the Padilla urn came back. By that point, I had settled into the rhythm of the place. Hargrove and Sons occupied a converted Victorian house on a tree-lined street in Meridian, a small city about 40 minutes south of the state capital. The house had been a funeral home since 1961, but Glenn's father had transitioned it to cremation only in 1989, and Glenn had continued that focus. There was no embalming room, no viewing parlour. There was a front reception area with good natural light and fresh flowers that Janine replaced every Monday. There were 2 consultation rooms. There was Glenn's office. There was a small kitchen where the staff ate lunch. and there was the back hallway which led to the crematory, a separate wing that Glenn had added in 2004, connected to the main house by a short, covered walkway. I had been in the crematory exactly once, during my orientation. Glenn walked me through it himself. 2 retorts, the industry term for the cremation chambers, a processing room where the remains were pulverized and placed into containers. A cooling area, a small room lined with shelves where urns waited for pickup. It was clean, professional, and mechanically straightforward. Glenn explained the process with the same calm, respectful specificity he applied to everything. Body goes in. Heat does the work. What comes out is calcium phosphate, calcium phosphates, calcium, calcium compounds, and calcium fragments. The calcium compounds are processed into the powder that families receive. He told me I would never need to go back there again unless I wanted to, and I didn't particularly want to, and that was that. My world was the front of the house, the families, the living. For 3 months that world made sense. Then the Padilas brought back the copper urn, and Glenn took them into his office, and 30 minutes late, they left without it. And the next morning, the urn was gone from the counter, and Janine had already ordered a replacement vessel, same model, same finish, and nobody mentioned it again. I might have let it go. People do change their minds about urns. Grief is not a linear process. Sometimes a family chooses a vessel, and then 6 weeks later, they look at it on the mantle, and it's wrong too formal, too industrial, too much like a thing and not enough like a person. It happens. But then the Ortegas brought theirs back. This was 9 days after the Padilla. Marcus Ortega had died at 54 of pancreatic cancer. I'd worked with his wife, Dana, and their 2 adult sons. They had chosen a handsome wooden urn, dark walnut, with a small brass plate engraved with his name and dates. It was a good choice. It felt like Marcus, who Dana described as a man who built things with his hands and didn't like anything flashy. Dana came in alone. She was not holding the urn carefully the way Mrs. Padilla had. She was holding it away from her body at arm's length, the way you hold something that has an odor. She set it on the counter hard enough that Janine flinched. "Something's wrong with it," Dana said. And Janine did the same thing. The same thing. She said, "I understand. Let me get Glenn." I was sitting at my desk in the consultation room with the door open. I could see the counter. I could see Dana's face. She wasn't grief confused. She wasn't having a change of heart about walnut versus mahogany. She was afraid. The skin around her eyes was tight, and she kept looking at the urn on the counter the way you look at a bag that moved when it shouldn't have. Glenn came out, did the thing with the 2 fingers on the side of the urn, nodded, took her back to his office. 20 minutes later, Dana left without the urn, without a replacement, without her husband's remains. This time I didn't ask Janine. I went to Glenn. His office door was open. He was sitting behind his desk, writing something in a ledger, an actual physical ledger, which I'd noticed he kept in addition to the digital records. He looked up when I knocked. He seemed to know what I was going to ask before I asked it. "Sit down, Marcus," he said. "My name is also Marcus. Same name as the man in the urn. That coincidence had never bothered me before. It bothered me slightly now, though I couldn't have said why. 2 families in 9 days, I said. Both bringing urns back. Both are getting the same response from Janine. Both leaving without the remains." Glenn set down his pen. He folded his hands on the desk. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from my hospice years, the expression of someone deciding how much truth the other person can hold. "Marcus," he said, "you are very good at your job. You are the best person in that consultation room I have had in 20 years of running this business. You make families feel held. You make them feel like the decisions they're making matter, and that the person they lost is being treated with dignity. That is your gift, and I hired you because of it." "Okay," I said. "Your gift depends on you believing completely in what we do here, in the process, in the care, in the integrity of what we return to families. If that belief has a crack in it, the families will feel the crack. They won't know what they're feeling, but they'll feel it. And your consultations will start going wrong, not dramatically, just a little off, a little hollow. And then you won't be able to do the thing that makes you irreplaceable." He let that sit. "So I'm asking you, as your employer, and as someone who respects you, not to ask about the returns. They are rare, they are handled, and they are not part of your job." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the only question I could think of that wasn't the question he'd told me not to ask. "How rare?" Glenn looked at me evenly. 3 to 5 per year. 3 to 5 families every year bring back urns, in a business that handled maybe 200 cremations annually. That's a rate. That's not a fluke and not a trend. That's a constant. I nodded. I thanked him. I went back to my desk. And for a while, several weeks, I did what he asked. I focused on the families. I did my work. I was good at it. I sat with a woman whose mother had died in a house fire and helped her understand that cremation was not a repetition of the trauma, but a transformation of it. And the woman cried and held my hand and told me I had given her permission to breathe. I sat with a man whose teenage son had died by suicide, and I did not try to fix anything or explain anything. I just sat with him in the silence for 45 minutes and then helped him choose an urn that looked like a river stone because his son had loved kayaking. This is what I do. This is what I'm for. But the crack was already there. It wasn't in my consultations. Glenn was right that the families couldn't feel it. But I could feel it at the edges of everything. When I walked a family to the door after a consultation and told them their loved one would be treated with the utmost care and dignity, I believed it. I did. But a small, cold part of my mind would add, "And then some of you will bring it back." I started paying attention to which families picked up their urns and which ones didn't. Most families picked up normally. They came in. Janine handed them the urn in a dignified bag with the Hargrove and Sons logo. They signed a receipt. They thanked us, and they left. Some cried. Some didn't. Some came back weeks later with a thank you card or a plate of cookies. That was the normal flow. That was the vast majority. But I started to notice something about the pickups that preceded the returns. Not during the pickup itself. Everything looked normal during the pickup. It was before. In the days between the cremation and the pickup, there was sometimes a call. Janine would take it. The family would be asking when the remains would be ready. This was normal. Families were eager or anxious or just needed a timeline. But occasionally Janine's tone would shift during these calls. Subtle. A slight formality would enter her voice, a careful precision in her phrasing, as if she were reading from a script she'd memorized so thoroughly it sounded natural, but wasn't. I heard her say once, "The remains are processed and resting comfortably in the vessel you selected. They'll be ready for you whenever you'd like to come." Resting comfortably. You don't say that about calcium phosphate powder. You say that about a person. And Janine, who was meticulous about professional language, who never confused the clinical with the personal, had said it as if it were the most natural phrase in the world. I started writing things down, not in any official capacity, just in a notes app on my phone. Dates, family names. Which calls got the formal Janine voice? Which pickups felt normal? And which ones had a texture to them that I couldn't identify but could sense? The way you can sense a room where an argument just ended, even when everyone is smiling. 6 weeks passed with no returns. Then the Voss family brought back a black marble urn containing, or supposedly containing, the remains of Gerald Voss, aged 78, a retired mail carrier with no surviving children, and one niece named Christine who had arranged everything. Christine didn't bring the urn to the front counter. She brought it to me. She came into the consultation room where we'd sat together 5 weeks earlier, and she put it on the table between us, and she said, "This isn't him." I felt the room change temperature, not literally, but the quality of the air shifted, the way it does when someone says something that you've been waiting to hear without knowing you were waiting. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, it's not him. I don't know what it is, but it isn't Uncle Jerry." "Christine, the cremation process." "I know what the process does. I know it turns a body into powder. I'm not saying I opened it and it looked wrong. I'm saying I've had it in my house for 5 weeks and it's not him. The house doesn't feel like him. It feels like something else is in the room, something that's paying attention." She was not hysterical. She was not confused. She was calm and specific and frightened. I put it on the shelf in the living room where he used to sit, and for the first wee icky, it was fine. It was just grief. I talked to it. I talked to him. I told him about my day, about the dog, about the leak in the roof he always said he'd fix. Normal grief stuff, and I felt comforted. I felt like he was there. She paused. Then I started noticing that the comfort had a weight to it, like it was pushing back. Like when I talked to the urn, something was listening, really listening and forming a response it couldn't quite deliver. I'd be in the kitchen and I'd feel the pull of the living room, not missing him, not grief, a pull, like the room wanted me to come sit with it. Grief can feel like... I moved it to the basement, just to test. I told myself I was being ridiculous, and I put it in the basement on a shelf next to the Christmas decorations, and the pull went away. For 3 days, the house felt normal. Empty, like it should after someone dies, but normal. She looked at the urn on the table. On the 4th day, I went down to the basement for something, and the urn was warm. Not a little warm. Warm the way a person's skin is warm. And the pull came back. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the basement. It was coming from everywhere below me. I didn't say anything. I didn't have anything to say. I picked it up and I drove here. And I need you to tell me what's inside this thing, Marcus, because I told Uncle Jerry everything about my life when I sat with that urn. And if that wasn't Uncle Jerry listening, then something else knows all of it now. I looked at the urn. Black marble, cool to the touch, 6.3 pounds, which was in the normal range for adult male remains. I had no reason to believe it contained anything other than what it was supposed to contain. I had no diagnostic tool, no way to test Christine's claim. What I had was a woman in pain who was telling me something that aligned structurally with what the Padilla and Ortega families had apparently experienced. A pattern of return, a sense that something was wrong, not with the urn but with the presence in it. I told her to wait, and I went to get Glenn. But Glenn was not in his office. He was in the back hallway, standing at the door that connected the main house to the crematory wing, and he was talking to someone I hadn't met. A tall woman in professional clothes, not funeral professional, more like corporate. Dark blazer, good shoes, a leather portfolio under one arm. She was nodding at whatever Glenn was saying with the attentive patience of someone who was being told something she already knew. Glenn saw me, and his expression didn't change, but his posture did. A slight squaring of the shoulders, a closing. "Marcus, this is Miss Calloway. She's a consultant." "For what?" I asked. "Process improvement," Miss Calloway said. She extended her hand. Her handshake was firm and warm. Warm the way Christine Voss had just described the urn being warm. I noticed this and immediately told myself I was being absurd. "Christine Voss is in the consultation room," I told Glenn. She brought back Gerald's urn. Glenn nodded, the same slow nod. "I'll handle it. Go take your lunch, Marcus." He walked past me toward the front of the house. Miss Calloway stayed where she was, at the door to the crematory wing, watching me with professional interest. "You're the family coordinator," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "How long have you been here?" "About 4 months. She made a small note in her portfolio, not writing just a mark, a tick. "You must hear a lot of personal information in those consultations," she said. "People tell you things about the deceased, about themselves, private things, things they wouldn't tell anyone else." "It's part of the grieving process," I said. "The consultation gives people a contained space to disclose," she said. "Yes, to give a full accounting of who the person was, what they meant, what they knew, what they carried. So the cremation can be appropriate to the individual." The way she said appropriate made me feel something I had not felt since I started this job. In my hospice years, I had developed a kind of emotional sonar, the ability to feel the shape of what someone was really saying underneath the words they were using. It's what made me good in the consultation room, and my sonar in that moment told me that Miss Calloway was describing something precise and technical that she was disguising as a metaphor. "Enjoy your lunch," she said. She turned and walked through the door into the crematory wing. The door closed behind her, and I heard the lock engage. I did not go to lunch. I went back to the consultation room, but Christine and the urn were already gone. Janine told me Glenn had taken care of it. She told me Christine had been offered a full reservice, a new cremation, a new urn, at no additional charge. "A new cremation of what?" I asked. Janine looked at me the way she had looked at the urn on the counter the day the Padillas brought theirs back, carefully. "The remains are reprocessed," she said. "Sometimes the initial processing is incomplete. Calcium compounds can retain thermal memory. It can make the vessel feel warm to the touch. It's a quality control issue. We reprocess, place the remains in a new vessel, and return them to the family." It was a perfect explanation. It was credible and scientific sounding, and it addressed exactly the symptom Christine had reported. I almost believed it, but I had been in Christine's presence when she described the pull. The sense of being listened to, the comfort had a weight. None of that was explained by thermal memory and calcium compounds. And Janine, who had given me the same frictionless explanation twice now, had not been in the room when Christine said any of it. She was explaining a symptom the family had not reported to her, which meant she already knew what the symptom was. I went home that night and sat in my apartment and tried to think about it the way I'd think about a clinical case in hospice. Grief does strange things. People feel presence. They hear voices. They feel warmth in objects associated with the deceased. This is documented, universal, and not pathological. Every single thing Christine Voss described could be fully explained by normal grief psychology, except for the return rate. 3 to 5 per year, Glenn had said. That meant 3 to 5 families out of 200 experienced something intense enough to physically bring the remains back to the business. That's not the normal rate of grief made me feel something weird about the urn. That's a consistent output. Something was producing these experiences at a steady, predictable rate. And the business had a protocol for it. Not a scramble, not a crisis response. A smooth, practiced protocol. Janine had her line. Glenn had his nod and his 2-finger touch. And now there was a consultant, a process improvement consultant, arriving at the exact time the returns were clustering. I should tell you that I almost quit. I typed the email. I sat with my thumb over the send button. I had savings. I had other options. I could go back to hospice or private grief counselling or any number of jobs where the thing I was good at, sitting with people in pain, didn't come with a locked door. I wasn't allowed to open. But I thought about the families, not the ones who brought the urns back, the ones who hadn't yet, the ones sitting in their living rooms right now with urns on their mantels, talking to their dead. And I thought, if something is wrong, someone who gives a damn about those people needs to be in the building where it's happening. And that was me. Not because I was brave, because I was positioned. So I stayed, and I started paying attention differently. The next 3 weeks were quiet, no returns. Miss Calloway appeared twice more, both times going directly to the crematory wing without stopping at reception. I saw her car in the lot, a silver sedan with out-of-state plates. I noted the state, but it's not relevant. What's relevant is that each time she visited, Glenn was different for the rest of the day. Not upset, not distressed, quieter. He would sit in his office with the door closed, and I could hear him writing in the ledger. Not the quick, efficient notes of business accounting. Long passages, the steady scratch of pen on paper for 20-30 minutes at a stretch. I began spending more time in the kitchen, which shared a wall with the back hallway. I could hear faintly the sounds from the crematory wing. The retorts had a distinctive hum when they were firing a low, steady vibration that you felt more than heard. They usually ran during business hours, 1 to 3 cremations per day, each taking 2 to 3 hours. Standard. But twice during those 3 weeks I heard the retorts firing after hours. I was alone in the building, finishing paperwork. Janine already gone. Glenn in the crematory wing. The vibration started at 6:45 in the evening. There was no cremation scheduled. I had access to the schedule. It was shared on the office system, so I could tell families when their loved one's cremation would take place. There was nothing in the books. A retort burning with nothing on the schedule. After hours, with only Glenn in the building. On one of these occasions, I went to the connecting door between the main house and the crematory wing. I didn't try to open it. I just stood there. The vibration was steady and strong, and through the door I could smell something I hadn't smelled before. Not the usual smell of the crematory, which is less dramatic than people imagine, mostly a sterile, heated mineral scent, like a kiln. This was different. There was something organic in it, not decomposition, something that reminded me of the way the air smells after a lightning strike ozone and ions, and the sense that the atmosphere itself has been rearranged. The vibration stopped, just cut off, no gradual wind down. And in the silence that followed, I heard something that I will describe as precisely as I can, because precision matters here more than drama. I heard a voice, a single syllable, a name maybe, or the beginning of one, spoken once and not repeated. It came from inside the crematory wing, and it was not Glenn's voice. It was lower, and it had a quality to it that I can only describe as produced, rather than spoken, as if the sound were being generated by a process rather than a person. The way a wine glass hums when you run your finger along the rim. A resonance in the shape of speech. Then Glenn's footsteps in the hallway. I moved back to the kitchen. He came through the connecting door and walked past me without speaking, went to his office and sat down to write in the ledger. I gave it another week. During that week, I quietly made contact with 3 families who had previously returned urns. Not the Padillas, Ortegas, or Vosses, as these were families from before my tenure. I found their names in the customer management system. The returns weren't flagged in the digital records, but they were findable if you knew to look, because each one had a second urn order placed weeks after the initial service. Same family, new vessel, no additional charge. The pattern was clear once you knew the shape of it. I called the first family the Pruitts and said I was following up on their experience to make sure they were satisfied with the resolution. Standard customer care, nothing suspicious. Alice Pruitt was silent for a long time after I identified myself. "You're new," she said. "I've been here about 5 months. The last one who called me was a woman, Janine. She called to check in after we brought my husband's urn back. She was very kind, very thorough, asked a lot of questions about what we'd experienced. She wrote it all down." "What had you experienced?" Another pause. Then, "My husband died angry. He died angry at me. We'd had a fight the night before, a real one, not a small one, and he went to bed furious and died in his sleep. And when I brought the urn home, the anger was still there, in the house. Not grief anger, his anger, specific, detailed, aimed at me. I could feel it when I walked past the urn. I could feel it when I was in another room. It was like he was still in the middle of the sentence he never got to finish. And you brought it back." "I brought it back and they reprocessed it, and the new urn was peaceful, just quiet, just gone, the way it should be when someone's gone. And I was grateful. I called and thanked Glenn personally." She paused again. "But I'll tell you what I didn't tell Glenn. The anger didn't disappear. It left the urn, yes, but it didn't disappear. For about 2 weeks after I got the new urn, I would find myself in conversations with people at the grocery store, at church. With my sister, and I would feel my husband's anger come up through me. Not my anger. His exact words, his phrasing, the specific grievance he'd been carrying that last night. It would come up out of me in conversation the way a burp comes up involuntary, from somewhere below conscious control, and then it would pass. And after 2 weeks, it was gone for good." "Where do you think it went?" I asked. "I think I dispersed it," she said. "I think it passed through me and into the people I talked to in tiny amounts, like a distribution. And I think that's what they wanted. I think the reprocessing didn't remove the problem. I think it changed the delivery method. I called 2 more families that week. The details were different, but the structure was identical. A presence in the urn that was specific to the deceased, not a generic haunting. Not an atmospheric disturbance, but the particular emotional signature of a dead person persisting in the remains. The return, the reprocessing, the new peaceful urn. And then a brief period in which the emotion that had been in the urn moved through the family member and out into their social world. dispersing through ordinary conversation until it was gone. I should tell you what I was feeling during this time, because it's important to the choices I made later. I was not frightened. I was something worse than frightened. I was recognizing a business model. Think about what a cremation service does. A family gives you their dead. You reduce the body to calcium compounds. You put the compounds in a vessel. You give the vessel back. Transaction complete. The commodity is closure. The product is the assurance that the dead are resolved, that what remains is inert, that the container on your mantle is an endpoint, not a vessel with an active cargo. But what if the cargo was, in some cases, not inert? What if certain cremations produced remains that carried, I don't have a better word for this, an emotional residue? A compression of whatever the dead person was feeling most intensely at the time of death, baked into the calcium compounds the way a fossil preserves the shape of something living. And what if a business that had been in operation for 63 years had learned this? Not all at once, not as a revelation, but gradually, the way any family business accumulates knowledge through complaints, through returns, through 3 generations of Hargroves observing that a certain percentage of their product came back because something was alive in it that shouldn't have been. 3 to 5 per year. Consistent. Predictable. A known defect rate. And the reprocessing, the second cremation, didn't eliminate the residue. It changed its form. It made it transmissible. It turned a contained emotional artifact into something that could pass through a living person and distribute itself into a community through ordinary social contact. I sat with this understanding for 3 days before I went to Glenn. I didn't go in anger. I didn't go in accusation. I went in grief, which is the emotion I understand best. I sat in the chair across from his desk and I told him everything I knew. The pattern, the calls, Alice Pruitt, the post-return dispersal, the after-hours burns, Miss Calloway. Glenn listened without interrupting. When I was done, he opened the ledger. He turned it to face me. It was not a business ledger. It was a log. Each entry was a name, a date of death, a cause of death, and then a long paragraph in Glenn's handwriting describing the emotional state of the deceased as reported by the family during their consultation. The consultations I ran. The disclosures that Christine Voss's uncle had made through me, that Dana Ortega had made through me, that hundreds of families had made through me. My consultations, my careful, compassionate, thorough consultations, where I asked families to tell me who the person was, what they carried, what they felt, and what they left unfinished, where I sat with people in the worst week of their lives and helped them articulate the full emotional landscape of the dead. The consultations are intake, I said. Glenn closed the ledger. Not the way you mean it, he said. You're not extracting anything. You're not doing anything wrong. What you do in that room is real. The comfort is real. The care is real. But the information goes somewhere. The information helps me understand what the remains will carry. If a person died in peace, genuine peace, the kind where everything is resolved, the remains are inert. There's nothing in them but calcium and minerals. The urn goes home and it's just an urn. That's most of them, the vast majority. And the rest? The rest died carrying something. Anger, grief, guilt, terror, love that had nowhere to go. And the cremation, the heat, the reduction doesn't destroy that. It distills it, concentrates it, and the remains carry it home. He said this the way he said everything, calmly, with the specificity of someone who has spent decades working in a single field and knows its properties the way a farmer knows soil. How long have you known? My grandfather figured it out in the 70s. He didn't have a framework for it. He just knew that certain urns came back and certain ones didn't. And he kept notes, and eventually the notes told a story. My father formalized it. He developed the reprocessing protocol, and I refined the consultation process. You refined the consultation process, I repeated. I made it longer, more thorough, more emotionally detailed, so that I could anticipate which remains would be active and prepare the families, subtly, for what they might experience. Or so that I could flag a case in advance and schedule the reprocessing before the urn ever went home. But they still go home, I said. You still send active urns home to families. I can't reprocess remains that haven't manifested yet. The residue doesn't become detectable until after the initial cremation. I need the return. I need the family to feel it, bring it back, and tell me what the feeling is, so I can calibrate the second burn correctly. Calibrate it to what? He looked at me with something I recognized. It was the expression I had seen him wear when he talked to families about their loved ones. Tender, careful, certain. To release it properly. To break it down into a form that can be absorbed by the living in small enough doses to be processed naturally. Instead of one person trapped in a house with their dead husband's rage, 30 people absorb a tiny amount of that rage through ordinary conversation over 2 weeks, and their own emotional systems metabolize it. It's gone, really gone. Not contained, not suppressed, metabolized. You're composting grief, I said. I'm completing a process that death interrupted, he said. When someone dies carrying something unresolved, the resolution doesn't happen. The emotion just stops. And stopped emotion doesn't decompose. It persists. What we do here, what this family has done for 60 years, is give it somewhere to go. I stood up. I walked to the window. The street outside was normal. Cars, trees. A woman walking a dog past the building without knowing what happened inside it. And Miss Calloway, I said. Miss Calloway represents a group of families in our industry who do the same work. She visits quarterly to compare data, our return rates, our reprocessing protocols, our dispersal outcomes. It's a network, about 40 operations nationally. 40 cremation services all doing this, all managing it, because the alternative is not managing it. And that means active remains sitting in living rooms across the country with no outlet, no dispersal, no completion. It means houses where the dead are louder than the living. You've heard what the families experience. Imagine that with no one to bring the urn back to. I left his office. I drove home. I sat in my apartment for 2 days. Here is what I thought about during those 2 days. I thought about every consultation I had ever conducted, every family I had sat with, every time I had asked a widow to describe her husband's last days, every time I had asked a parent to tell me about their child, every time I had gently, skillfully, with real compassion, opened a grieving person up and let them pour out the emotional landscape of someone who had just died. I had believed I was doing this for the family, for their healing, for their closure. And maybe I was. Maybe that was real and true, and the families were genuinely helped by the process, but the information, the detailed, specific, emotional information that I gathered was also being used to anticipate which remains would be active, to flag cases, to prepare for the reprocessing. My compassion was doing double duty. It was real. And it was harvest. I thought about Alice Pruitt, feeling her dead husband's anger rise in her like a burp and pass into the people around her at the grocery store, at church, with her sister. 30 people absorbing tiny doses of a dead man's rage. Did those 30 people feel something? A flash of irrational anger at the checkout line? A moment of unexpected bitterness during a sermon? Did they attribute it to their own bad day, their own stress, and never once wonder where it came from? I thought about 40 cremation services doing this across the country, about the volume, thousands of cremations per year nationally, with a consistent percentage of active remains being reprocessed and dispersed into communities through the families who returned the urns. An infrastructure of emotional distribution operating inside the mundane shell of a death care industry that no one wanted to examine too closely because no one wants to think about what happens to a body after you hand it over. And I thought about Glenn's ledger. The entries were written in his careful hand. The names, dates, and emotional summaries read like case files. My consultations transcribed and preserved not as records of compassionate care but as predictive data. Which deaths would produce active remains? Which families were likely to return urns? Which emotional residues would require reprocessing? And what would the dispersal pattern look like when they re-enter the community? On the third day, I went to the local newspaper. I want you to understand that this was not a moment of heroic revelation. I did not stride into the newsroom with a folder of evidence. I sat down with a reporter named Sandra Chen, and I told her, in the same calm and specific way I would have told a family about their cremation options, what I had observed and what I'd been told. I told her about the returns, the reprocessing, the after-hours burns, the consultant and the ledger. I told her about Alice Pruitt's experience and the 2 other families I had contacted. I told her I could not prove any of it, and that Glenn Hargrove would deny all of it, and that the physical evidence, the ledger, the schedule discrepancies, the reprocessing records, was inside a private business that she could not access. Sandra listened carefully. She asked questions. She took notes. She told me she would make some calls. 2 days later, she called me back. She had contacted the State Cremation Licensing Board. She had asked about complaint patterns, families reporting unusual experiences with remains. She had expected to find nothing. She found 47 complaints in the past 18 months, spread across 9 different cremation services in the state. The complaints were remarkably consistent. Families describing warmth in urns, a sense of presence, emotional experiences that felt foreign, not their own grief, but the specific, recognizable emotional signature of the deceased. In every case, the cremation service had offered a free reprocessing, and in every case the complaint had been resolved. 47 complaints, 9 services, in one state. Sandra was excited. She thought she had a consumer protection story, defective cremation practices, a cover-up, an industry scandal. I let her think that. I let her run with it. I helped her file FOIA requests for the licensing board records. I connected her with Alice Pruitt, who agreed to be interviewed. I did everything a whistleblower is supposed to do. And then Glenn called me, not on my cell phone, on the landline in my apartment, a number I hadn't given him, a number I wasn't sure I'd given anyone. "Marcus," he said, "I know what you're doing, and I need you to understand what's going to happen. You're going to fire me. I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to promote you." Silence. "The network has been expecting this," he said. "Ms. Calloway's quarterly visits aren't just data comparison, they're readiness assessments. We've known for several years that the current model, quiet returns, private reprocessing, family-level dispersal, has a scalability problem. The return rate is consistent, but the population is growing, cremation rates are increasing, and the number of active remains is rising faster than the family return system can process them." "Glenn." We need a new dispersal model. One that doesn't depend on individual families bringing urns back one at a time. One that distributes the residue more efficiently across larger populations through a wider social surface. Glenn, what are you telling me? I'm telling you that public attention is a dispersal surface. A newspaper article about unusual cremation experiences reaches 30,000 readers. Each reader processes the emotional content of the article, the grief, the anger, the unresolved love in tiny, subclinical doses. They feel a moment of sadness reading about Alice Pruitt's husband, a flash of unease about their own mortality, a brief, inexplicable tenderness toward a stranger, and then it passes, and the residue is gone. I hung up. I stared at the phone. I called Sandra Chen. I told her to stop. Don't publish. Kill the story. Are you serious? She said. We have 47 complaints on record. We have a pattern across 9 facilities. This is what they want, I said. The story is the product. The article is the urn. Every person who reads it absorbs a dose. Sandra was quiet for a long time. That's insane, she said. That's not how journalism works. That's not how reading works. You can't, Marcus, you can't catch a dead person's feelings from reading a newspaper article. You can't catch a dead person's feelings from calcium phosphate powder either. And yet 47 families filed complaints. I'm publishing the story, she said. You don't get to spike it because your ex-boss told you a scary story on the phone. She published it. It ran on a Sunday. Front page of the local section. Families report unusual experiences with cremation remains. State Licensing Board investigating complaints across 9 facilities. It included Alice Pruitt's account. It included the complaint data. It included a statement from Glenn Hargrove expressing deep commitment to quality and customer satisfaction. It was shared 4,000 times in the first 48 hours. Regional outlets picked it up, then national. The story had everything: death, mystery, grieving families, and a whiff of institutional negligence. It travelled the way stories travel now, fast, wide, shallow. People read the headline, maybe the first few paragraphs, felt something, and moved on. Felt something. I watched the metrics because Sandra shared them with me, not understanding why I was asking. 4,000 shares became 40,000. Comment sections filled with people describing their own experiences with cremation and urn that felt warm, a room that felt occupied, a moment of inexplicable emotion standing next to a mantle. Some of these were real experiences. Some were pareidolia, pattern matching, and the power of suggestion. It didn't matter. The distinction didn't matter. Because Glenn was right. Not about the mechanism. I don't know if reading a news article can actually transmit the distilled emotional residue of a dead person. I don't know if that's what was happening. I can't know. And neither can you. But what I know is this. Hargrove and Sons received 0 returns in the 4 months following publication. 0. For the first time in the company's recorded history, not a single family brought back an urn. The return rate, which had been consistent for 60 years, dropped to nothing. And Miss Calloway visited 3 times during that period. Each time, she went directly to Glenn's office instead of the crematory wing. Each time, she left with pages from the ledger, and each time I heard her say the same thing as she walked past my desk. Distribution is nominal. I still work at Hargrove and Sons. I was not promoted. Glenn never mentioned the promotion again. But my role has shifted in ways that are difficult to describe. I still sit with families. I still run consultations. I am still good at it. But now, when a family describes their loved one, the anger, the grief, the unfinished love. I find myself shaping the narrative, not steering the family toward a particular urn or a particular service, but shaping the story of who the dead person was into something that will travel well, something with clean emotional edges, something that will read clearly if it needs to be read, by many people, at scale. I don't know when I started doing this. I don't remember deciding to do it. It's possible I was always doing it and just didn't know what it was for. The article is still online. Sandra wrote a follow-up 6 months later, noting that the licensing board investigation had been quietly closed. No violations found. No families harmed. The story is inert. Now it sits in the newspaper's archive the way an urn sits on a shelf, holding something that was once active but has been fully dispersed. Except sometimes I check the metrics and I see that someone, somewhere, has shared the original article again. A grief forum, a Reddit thread about paranormal experiences, a Facebook group for people who've recently lost someone. It circulates. It reaches new people. They read it, feel something, and the feeling passes through them and into the people they talk to, that day in tiny, untraceable doses. Glenn told me the alternative was houses where the dead are louder than the living. He told me this was completion. That's what we were doing, finishing a process that death interrupted. I want to believe him. Some mornings I do. But I think about Alice Pruitt at the grocery store, feeling her dead husband's anger rise within her and pass into the woman behind her in the checkout line. I think about that woman going home and snapping at her kids for no reason. I think about those kids carrying a sliver of a dead stranger's rage into their classrooms, into their friendships, into the slowly accreting emotional landscape of their lives. I think about 40,000 people sharing an article and feeling a flicker of something that wasn't theirs. And I think about the fact that you just read this, the whole thing, all the way to the end. You stayed because it felt important, because something in it pulled you forward, the way Christine Voss described being pulled toward the living room. And now you're carrying whatever this put in you, and you'll carry it into the next conversation you have, and the person you talk to will carry a smaller piece of it into theirs. I'm not warning you. A warning would be the wrong frame. I don't have enough certainty for a warning. I'm just telling you that the return rate at Hargrove & Sons is still 0. The reprocessing chamber hasn't fired in months, and Ms. Calloway keeps visiting, keeps reviewing the distribution numbers, and keeps saying the same thing as she passes my desk. Nominal. The system isn't broken. The system has been upgraded. The urns don't come back anymore because they don't need to. The dispersal method found a wider surface, and I, the man who sat in the consultation room and taught families to articulate the shape of their grief, I was the one who opened the door. Not because I was brave, not because I was right, because I was positioned.